how it's going, and I'll let you know in just a second. And we're live streaming.
Okay, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. We're here today for the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization Technical Advisory Committee meeting. This is a special TAC meeting. It's Tuesday, the 21st at 11 a.m. Welcome, everyone. Ms. LeDuc is unable to join us or will be joining us late today, so I'm filling in as vice chair. Chet, Mr. Parsons, do you have a statement regarding virtual meetings?
We're going to continue the practice that we've been following until further notice. We are meeting virtually as the TAC, and the Zoom platform is the one we are using. If there are members of the public that are participating in any of our meetings, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen where people can ask questions as the meetings proceed. And staff will be monitoring those boxes to make sure we address them in a timely manner. Otherwise, just business as usual.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Ms. Firestone, would you please call roll?
Yes, ma'am. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos. Miss Amos. She is with us. We'll go back and see if she's able to connect. Charles City County, Miss Russell. Mr. Mitchell. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker. Goochland County, Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Mr. Going. Henry County, Mr. Vadunez.
Here.
Henrico County, Vice Chair Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Chair LeDuc. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine.
Here.
Thank you. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Bridewell. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Sparks. GRTC, Ms. Sink.
Present.
Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Plan RBA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel. Right Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
Thank you. VDOT, Ms. McAdory. And Ms. Mueller.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. That concludes the roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. Next on the agenda, number 1, consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda. Are there any amendments? Hearing none, we will move on to the next item. Open public comment period. Do we have any public comments or anything in the chat?
Got no public comments.
Thank you. Moving on to the main agenda, STBG CMAC Program Development Fiscal Year 23-28 Draft Allocations. Mr. Parsons or Mr. Bushing, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So the purpose of this meeting, as you all know, is to get through our draft allocations plans. So I just want to take a few minutes to give you an overview of where we are and the process and the allocations included that are new in these plans. So just a quick reminder, our primary responsibility, or one of them as the TPO, is selecting projects and uses for the sub-allocated STBG and CMAC funding. Based on our program framework, sponsors are able to request either new projects or additional funding for existing projects. Existing project requests are generally prioritized over new projects. and the framework provides specific guidance for cost increases and how to request funding for those. So the big change since our last meeting is that we do have an updated budget. So on March 15th, we were provided with the budget numbers for FY23 to 28. It significantly improved our financial situation compared to last summer. We adopted the last allocations plan. Another just piece for information is the project scorecards are included in your agenda packets. So this is for you to be able to see how the projects were assessed, but they follow the Connect RVA 2045 format, so it should be relatively easy to follow. And the final score is a benefit cost determination, so it follows the same format as Connect RVA 2045. So moving into the RSTP program. So this is the budget. As I noted, it is significantly improved. So as you can see, it's 17.3% more funding than we had last summer when we adopted our allocations plan. It's about $3.5 million on average more for each year. So this is a definite improvement since we had a lot of requests for existing projects and outstanding balances in FY28. This really helped to address a lot of those issues. So for the existing projects, we brought to you a recommendation in February, which called for partial funding for each of those requests. But those were built around the old budget constraints, which no longer exist. So this allocation plan that's before you fully funds each of the requests for a total of 11.3 million. So there were 5 projects, 3 in Henrico, 1 in Hanover, and 1 in Chesterfield. If you look at the allocations plans that were included, most of them will show as surpluses. That's because these funds are replacing no posts. So once it's updated through the App A, that'll go away. The math will work out essentially. On top of those allocations, we do have 4 projects with significant unfunded balances. So there's the first one is the Mayo Bridge in the city of Richmond. It shows as a $9.5 million deficit. This project is being rescoped right now. So there's a new funding plan and new estimate under development. Once that's finalized, the TPO's allocations will be included as part of that rescoped project. But that was something we set aside for now, since that process is underway at this moment. The other 3 projects are all existing projects that had increases based on VDOT's updates for the SIP. So the first 2 are in Henrico and they're on Broad Street. The 2 in red, the Goochland and Henrico project, were both scheduled to start PE this upcoming fiscal year, so FY23. Because of these deficits, they're not able to start PE unless the deficit is addressed. But since the update came after the fact, we didn't have a request. So the initial draft that you have before you does not address these deficits. They're left unfunded. And at VDOT's recommendation, we pushed back the PE funding for 1 fiscal year to FY24. So this is the approach that staff took in addressing it. We are able to revise the plan based on tax direction. But the thought being that since there was no request, we couldn't go ahead and fund it outright. So we did want to bring this up for tax discussion, since this was a decision that staff had to make in developing the draft plan. Because we didn't address those deficits, we did have a little extra funding. So it's about $8 million of new projects that's programmed. So the average award for the new projects was 2.1 million. You can see there are 3 projects with full funding and 1 project that is a leveraging application. So this would just be for PE, and then the sponsor would need to go out and seek funding through Smart Scale or federal grants, any other type of program. So just a quick overview of those projects. The first one is Lewis Road dual lefts in Chesterfield. So this is just a minor widening to provide for a second left-hand turn lane. The VDOT estimate is significantly higher, so there is some risk that this project would have cost increases over time. The next project is Busy Street Extended. This is also in Chesterfield. Essentially, this project is part of an overall quadrant configuration for the Huguenot Courthouse 60 intersection. So the intent is that eventually this would be a collector that would potentially in the future reduce the left-hand turns and eliminate those at the main intersection and use this as the quadrant configuration. There is a little risk on this one as well. The roads are functionally classified as local currently. Staff did verify with VDOT that we could proceed with allocations, even though it's not generally eligible and a functional class update would be required. So there is some risk because that's not a guaranteed thing. That does have to go through central office and up to FHWA for approval. The third fully funded project is US 60 at Holly Hills. So this is just a right-hand turn lane. It's a pretty minor project, and this is matches with VDOT's estimate, so there's no known risk on that side right now. And the last is the overpass. So this is part of the DC to RVA higher speed rail initiative. This is in the town of Ashland, and essentially it's a minor reconfiguration of the roadway to then put in an overpass to replace the grade crossing. This again is just leveraging funds. So it's intended just to support PE only, and then to go out and seek additional funding using that as leverage. So those are the 4 projects that were proposed as new. That's everything I had for the RSTP program. So Madam Chair, I didn't know if you wanted to open discussion on RSTP first and then move on to CMAC, or go through both.
I would prefer you go through both, and then we'll open the floor for questions and discussion after you go through CMAC. Thank you.
Sure. So the next is the CMAC allocations. Similarly, the budget is significantly improved. So we have about $1 million more each year on average across the plan, 12.7% increase overall. Existing projects were all fully funded. So there were 3 requests. All of those requests were met. In addition, there was extra funding given to the Henrico and Chesterfield projects. The Henrico project was a request that was submitted based on the old estimate. As I mentioned with the RSTP program, there were revised estimates from this spring. Since this is a fully TPO funded project and there had been a request for additional funding that TAC had tentatively okayed moving forward with, we went ahead and programmed it to address the full deficit as opposed to just the 524 that were originally requested. And then similarly on the Chesterfield project, we increased the CMAC to 770,000, 756. Essentially what's happened here, we had closeouts that happened this fall, and it was unmatched CMAC funding. So it needs to go to a project that has local dollars. As this project already has Chesterfield's commitment to supply local dollars to fill the deficit, we thought this would be a good use of the unmatched CMAC funding. And it's a $1.2 million deficit in total. So this doesn't take up the whole deficit, but it allows us to use those local dollars to make good use of CMAC dollars that would otherwise just be sitting around. The other consideration with this is those CMAC dollars did need to be reallocated by April. So it's a time sensitive as well, which is why staff went ahead and included it. So even with those additional allocations, we had additional funding available. I think we mentioned back in February that the CMAC program was in a much better place than the RSTP program to start. So there are 2 new projects that are proposed to be fully funded through CMAC, one in the city of Richmond and one in Chesterfield, and then one project that would be partially funded through the CMAC program. So the first one is the signal system retiming in the city of Richmond. So this is 1.7, 1.8 million. And this is essentially developing the timing plan for the entire city. So it's 400 some odd intersections. And it would be a comprehensive look at the city's signal system. The Alversa roundabout, this is in Chesterfield. This was in Smart Scale's initial drafts last round for funding, and then it was removed. Essentially, this is replacing a stop controlled intersection with a single lane roundabout. And this one does have potential risk. As you can see, the VDOT estimate is about 40% higher than the locality estimate. Since it's locally administered, proposed to be, we did move forward with the locality estimate, but that is something to consider. And then the last project is in Hanover. This is Creighton Parkway, Creighton Road, Walnut Grove. So this was originally considered for potential realignment to create a single intersection. Since it's a little offset here, it creates delays and crashes. Instead, this is an innovative dog bone roundabout. So this is essentially going to function as one intersection despite the offset. This project, PE and right-of-way are being picked up by the locality, and just construction would be funded through the CMAC program. So those are the three new projects proposed for CMAC. The requested action today is pretty straightforward. What we're ultimately looking for is a recommendation, and it would be to select the following projects for RSTP with the project list, for CMAC with the project list, and then approving the allocations plans and approving and directing staff to take any necessary steps for the transfers of previous funds that are included in those allocations plans. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about either the programs or our process in developing this.
Thank you, Miles, for the update. And Raiko has comments, but I'm going to yield the floor to other TAC members to provide comments first. Any questions or discussion items?
Madam Vice Chair?
Yes, Shannon.
I think I heard Ms. Clark first, and then we'll go to Mr. Coleman.
My question is really quick. Miles, could you explain to me again how, if we were funding existing projects, where the new projects came from?
Sure. So the initial plan, what we discussed back in February and at the last TAC meeting, was based on the old budget that was available as far as we knew from last July. So that was the last numbers that we had, and that's what we were starting with. On the 15th, we received the updated budget numbers for the FY 23 to 28 program, and it's significantly more funding. It's about 17 or 18% more in RSTP, and I think it was about 13% more for the CMAC program. So it's that additional funding that made it possible to select new projects.
Where were the new projects from? I mean, were they submitted in 21, 22?
These were the applications that were submitted this past fall. So in September, October.
And the selection of these new projects was done by how?
It's the scoring process is described in the regional funding framework, which was the updated guidelines for RSTP CMAC that were adopted in July. So that was essentially staff followed that. It's very similar to the CVTA scoring, but it includes additional elements that are not in the CVTA scoring. And it's basically the same as what was in the LRTP in terms of the different goals and performance measures. So that was the first cut, and then it was looking at each of the funding programs and determining how much was available and could a project be funded, and we worked our way down the priority list.
Do you have that spreadsheet you could share with me or the group at least?
Yes, we can share the spreadsheet too. The scorecards are in there, but we may have forgotten to attach the spreadsheet itself.
Yeah, because the scorecard, thanks for that, but yeah, I would like to see kind of I wasn't sure how you selected based on the scorecard in a comprehensive fashion.
Sure, we can definitely provide that.
Thank you.
Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Yes, Tom Coleman, Goose County. Yeah, and just a couple of concerns with moving the funding on our Goochland project. Number one, we did not have an opportunity to see that cost increase. It was a pretty significant cost increase. We don't know, for example, that project, most of the right of way is being dedicated by proffer. We don't know if all the details like that were included in that cost estimate. But also, this project was pushed back last year because there was an adjustment to the allocation. So this project was already pushed back a year with the understanding that we would get funded, this fiscal year. So I think we would request to at least fund the PE on this project so that we can keep this project moving forward.
Sure. So, and just to that broader point, our initial approach was looking at keeping those allocations intact in the current year. The issue or the concern here is that the projects will not be able to start unless they can show that there's no deficit. So that would be the main concern. So VDOT's recommendation is either to fully fund the requests, and if they can't be fully funded within the 6-year program, their recommendation was to push it out for PE to allow more time to get the full funding in place. And that's essentially the concern. It's the same approach that we took on Henrico's project, was essentially, if we didn't have it fully funded, push out PE 1 year to give us more time to find a funding strategy and put that into place.
Did anyone else have any comments or discussion? Otherwise, I will chime in. All right. So Henrico's perspective is we weren't aware of the revised VDOT cost estimates for West Broad Street at Dominion and Cox. And I think they increased the cost estimates by $3 million. I think it was supposed to start last year as well. And then it was supposed to start this year. And now, as proposed, it's being delayed another year. And this is a high priority corridor with transit along there. And I think Henrico thinks these existing projects should be fully funded before we move on to funding new projects. And I guess, Miles, as this is worded, this recommendation or requested action, it does not include funding existing projects as worded, correct?
Correct. So the existing projects that had requests were included in the allocations plan, but any other deficits were not. At TAC's request, staff is happy to go back and rework the program. To address all of the deficits, we would need to remove any of the new projects. And I'm not 100% sure we could get all the way there, particularly with the Goochland project. It is a large deficit. I think it's more than we have allocated on the new projects, but staff could go back and take a look at addressing those and moving the PE back to FY23, if that's the direction that TAC wants to go with this.
Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, we would support moving PE back to FY23 on our project.
I think the problem is going to be that there's not sufficient funding to fully fund the projects with deficits so that they can proceed. I mean, some of them, but like you said, Miles, the Goochland one, it was short how much? 10 million? Yeah. And so until it is fully funded, you're still stuck. Does Goochland have, I'm not even going to say it because I don't think you do, but another fund source to?
Well, we just were made aware of this, but Friday or last week. So we haven't had an opportunity to review potential funding sources.
Yeah. What kind of deadline do you have, Miles, for getting this to VDOT?
So the VDOT draft SIP deadline is based, I think it's Friday. And Nicole, please correct me if we're wrong, but our intent was to try and get it back to them as soon as possible. The bigger priority or the more immediate priority is if we are going to go back and rework this, we do need to know the Vaughn Road project, even though we would only be funding PE for leveraging, it is a large project over $30 million. So it is required to be finalized today for the SIP review and public comment period for the CTB. So that's really the main priority that we need to know, or more immediate priority. If we're not including that project, I think we have a little bit more flexibility in terms of timing.
Say that one more time. Which one?
Sure. The Ashland project, the Von Road overpass, it's basically, I think it's 25 million. And again, Nicole, please correct me if I'm wrong, but 25 million or more requires the project be out there for the public review period that the CTB holds on the SIP. So we need to know whether that project's going to be included in the draft plan or not. If we're going back to rework it, I think we can safely say that that would be dropped because that was the bottom ranking of the 4 projects that were included.
I thought that one was that was the leveraging one.
Correct. It is just leveraging, but we're not able to open up PE only UPC. So it's the entire project cost has to be factored in. So for the CTB's purposes, it's a $30 million project or whatever the total number was.
I thought that we would, well, for one, I don't think unless something's changed, I don't think you can have a PE only RSTP project. So I thought by calling it leveraging, we would show that money in our plan. And then Ashland would be going after the rest of the funding. And once it was fully funded, then we'd be able to proceed and, open up PE, get going and do the project.
Correct. So that is the approach, but to be able to allocate it to that project, to be able to use it as leveraging, like for in Smart Scale, for example, we have to put it on the UPC. So to create the UPC, they need the full cost of PE right away and construction.
Oh my gosh, that seems like a bureaucratic loophole sort of thing that we should be able to fix.
Yeah, and Miles, with that, if we put the total project and then it doesn't get funding, is it then like in the pipeline for the 35 million to be allocated to it?
No. So the way we've written the guidelines is if it does not get the outside funding that the leveraging was intended to achieve, then the sponsor can come back and recompete for full funding. But otherwise the project would just be deallocated and deselected. So we would essentially say, we're not going to move forward with the full cost. We were only committed to that PE phase.
This is Austin with Richland County. I just think it's a little much of a stretch. We have less than a week from being notified of the shortfall on our project of $10 million to then finding a new funding source. I think that's kind of pushing it, to say the least.
This is Sharon. I make a motion for Plan RVA to reevaluate appropriating funding to fund existing projects based on VDOT's revised estimates, and then look into funding new projects.
Austin going with a second.
Is there any discussion?
This is Ashland. I don't know if there's time for this or not, but Tom mentioned that VDOT may not realize that they have proffered right of way, and they may have calculated that into their cost. So maybe it's not 10 million, maybe it's 2 million. Do we have time to get with VDOT to see if they understand that?
Sure. We can reach out to the district staff, and I'm sure Nicole will follow up as well to see if we can get more information and maybe set something up between Goochland and VDOT, but I'm not sure there'll be enough time for us to include that with the program. But we can definitely reach out and see what's possible on that side.
Oops, I have a quick comment. I'm hoping that localities will look at contributing to some of that deficit so that it's not coming all out of CMAC and RSTP. We'd love to get some of these new projects started. But I do think it's priority to fund our existing projects first, generally speaking. So.
Or to your point, I mean, if we had known about, this much of a shortfall, we probably could have done something a little different with some of our local money. But just not knowing this until the last minute it'd be tough for Goochland to contribute a large sum to a $10 million shortfall.
Yeah, I understand.
Sure. And, just so everyone's on the same page, staff has also only become aware of these since last week when we started working on the allocations plan. So this is not, we weren't sitting on it. This is something new for us as well. And as we developed the allocations plans, we had to work with the new numbers.
Any other discussion? Thanks for everyone's input. All right, Ms. Firestone, would you please do a vote?
Ashland, Miss Amos,
Aye.
I'm sorry, what's the motion exactly?
Sure, I will take a stab at it. It's to fund the existing projects that Miles had mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, but also to have Plan RVA look at funding the existing projects that VDOT submitted revised estimates for before funding new projects.
Is this RSTP only? RSTPG?
This is STVG and CMAC, but both. But
yeah.
I don't think there was any glaring error with CMAC. Go ahead, Miles.
That's correct. There were no large deficits on the CMAC program. Everything was fully funded. I think the only project that had a deficit was a PE only project in Henrico County, the Beulah roundabout. Everything else is fully funded. So it's just these three that are in colored boxes, I think, that would be considered as part of this motion. Those are the three that were changed based on VDOT's updated estimates for the projects.
So I feel like this group needs to see a draft of what you guys come up with, that we can't just let this be the final action. So I guess I would propose a friendly amendment that we ask Miles to take a look at funding the existing projects with shortfalls, and if possible, take a look at new projects after that and come back to the group with a draft that we can take action on.
Chet, Mr. Parsons, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, I understand everybody's concerns, and we have the same ones with not getting the actual budget until last week and having the deadline being this Friday. We're really, we need to work closely with VDOT to make sure we understand the boundaries of the discussion, and we'll certainly get something back to everyone as soon as possible. Once we understand these things, I am curious about the Goochland project as well, regarding the proffered commitments. And once we understand those impacts, we'll certainly get something turned around. I think Miles has done a great job to have everything prepared and ready for discussion, but it's not just, it's a group effort. So we're certainly going to be working with VDOT after the meeting to make sure we have everything lined up.
But go ahead, Ms. Smith.
Maybe we could submit the draft knowing that, you're going to bring it back to the group so that we can look at it. And if there are revisions, handle those with an amendment, tip amendment sort of stuff. So you meet the deadline, you put something in, a placeholder, sort of.
Sure. So that approach we've used in previous years when we had a draft budget and didn't get the final budget until the summer. So I think that approach is reasonable, but I think staff will be able to, with a little clarification on the actual estimate needs, I think we'll be able to at least meet the existing projects for the most part. So I think that off the top of my head, I don't see any new projects being included once we go back and add these in, but that's to be seen.
And that was for all 4 projects or just the 3 highlighted or in a box?
Just the 3 that are highlighted. So the Mayo Bridge project, when it was originally selected, was more of a maintenance and deck repair type project, and it's now evolved into a full superstructure replacement. So the revised estimate that the city submitted is about $80 million. And it was originally, I think, about 8 when we started with the project 10 years ago. So that the funding plan is being worked out right now with VDOT and with the city. So we're kind of waiting to see how that all plays out and before we address anything additional on that project. But I think RSTP will still play a part in whatever the final funding program will be.
And with the TIP amendment that Barb mentioned, were we talking about maybe going forward with the changes of funding existing projects? Because otherwise I worry about delaying existing project work, then having to amend the TIP later. Or are we just talking about amending the TIP to include new projects later?
I was suggesting amending the TIP. It would be our opportunity. Miles would meet the deadline by submitting something on Friday, but then we would have an opportunity to take a look at it after. And if there are amendments that we need to make to existing or whatever, we would do that at a different time through TIP amendments. For instance, if we can't get a revised estimate from VDOT in time for the Goochland project, then we would handle that with a TIP amendment. If they say, oh yeah, we can reduce right of way by $2 million, we would do a TIP amendment, then that would free up $2 million and we could decide what we want to do with that $2 million.
And I think the other important thing to consider is everything that's in the out years is not final. So everything beyond FY23, we're going to revisit again when we start over the process in the fall. So really it's making sure FY23 is locked down, and then everything beyond that, it's tentative for now.
I think it's important for Henrico's 118597 on West Broad Street and Goochland's 105-733 to keep moving as it's an existing project and supposed to start PE now that it should be funded. So I will leave my previous motion on the table to fund to have Plan RVA look at funding the existing projects that had 3 existing projects that had a shortfall based on VDOT's estimate and look at funding them this round, and then looking at funding new projects.
Madam Chair, this is Chet. We did have a motion and a second. And that's, I believe we We stopped with.
And we
Smith.
stopped, yes,
Yeah.
because we hadn't missed. Thank you. And thank you for helping me with this procedure.
You ready for me to continue the roll call?
I do see Miss, yes.
Ms. Smith. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Ms.
I'll
Smith,
abstain.
Mr. Coleman,
Aye.
Mr. Godinez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Chair LaDuke,
I'm going to abstain. I'm sorry I was late, so I missed most of the discussion.
thank you. Mr. Chardine, Mr. Chardine,
Aye.
thank you. Ms. Clark,
I have one question. Miles, what were you doing with regard to the city of Richmond and the new date that needed to be applied? I mean, the new funding amount. What's happening with that? I'm sorry. With the Mayo Bridge.
Sure. So the Mayo Bridge, as you know, is the estimate has been updated or is in the process of being updated. We left all of the existing RSTP amounts on the project. And then when the final estimate is available and we have the new schedule, if the city needs additional funding, you can come back and request it. But we didn't touch any of the allocations. It's still the same amount that was allocated previously to the project.
Oh, okay. Aye.
1 second. Ms. Dubinsky? Ms. Sink?
Aye.
Mr. Parsons?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe?
Aye.
And Ms. Mueller?
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for that item.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let me look at what's next on the agenda. TAC, any TAC member comments? Hearing none, our next meeting is scheduled for April 12th. It'll be virtual is the plan, and I consider this special TAC meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.